In this video, we're going to talk about drum fills. So what is a drum fill? Well, it's a musical device that we use to bridge the gap between different sections of the music. It can be used to set up a certain section, or it can be used as a transition from one part of the music to the next part. Drum fills can be very fun to play and they're fun to practice, but it's really easy to overplay using fills. So we don't want to get into that territory, and we don't want to overplay, just like we don't want to play too many crashes. So I've got a measure notated here, and you'll notice that the first half of the measure doesn't have anything in it except a little box. That's called a half rest. Just like the half note, it gets 2 counts, but because it's a rest, that means we don't play anything. So the way that would be counted is 1, 2, then 3 and 4 and on the snare drum, followed by a crash on beat 1. This is what it sounds like. 1, 2. So now let's do that together and practice that fill, which is 2 beats long, 4 notes starting on beat 3. So I'll count us off, and I want you to count out loud 1, 2, 3, and 4, and psh. Okay, ready? 1, 2. 1, 2. Now let's put that fill in the context of a groove. We're going to play a full measure of groove and then 2 beats of groove, then the 2-beat fill. Now, be careful when you're playing this not to rush. It's very common to rush in fills because we're going from every 8th note here in one hand to alternating the 8th notes in both hands. So just be aware of the time, and the pulse of those 8th notes going by should remain the same throughout all of this. We're going to play this 2-bar phrase 4 times in a row. I'll count us in. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Playing a fill every 2 bars is great when you're practicing because you get a lot of repetitions in a short amount of time. However, in a real musical context, playing with other people, you're never going to play that many fills. You're never going to play that many crashes. So don't get too used to playing that way. Now we're going to play 4-bar phrase with that same 2-beat fill at the end. So you're going to play 3.5 measures of groove with ba, 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 3 and 4 and at the end, leading to a crash to start the phrase over. We're going to do that 4-bar phrase 4 times in a row, so 16 measures total. And one thing to pay attention to is this particular groove is the same in every measure for the first 3 measures. And then we have boom, ba, 3 and 4 and. Okay, so you have to count, you have to know which measure you're in and how many measures have gone by to be able to put that fill in the right place in the phrase to get back on 1 after the 4 bars. So here we go, I'll count us in. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. It's a common misconception that you need toms or a bunch of toms or a bunch of cymbals and a bunch of gear to be able to play effective fills. In fact, with just the snare drum and the bass drum, I can play that same 2-beat 8th note fill in a whole bunch of different ways that are interesting and that serve the music perfectly well. Once I start combining the instruments, instead of just playing dot, 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 I could play snare drum, then bass drum, which would sound like, right? You've actually heard that, I'm sure, on popular music. You could play something like this. You could bring the hi-hats into it and play something like. One of the most effective tools we have as musicians are what we call dynamics. Now this is how loud or soft we play in the context of the music. As drummers, when we play a fill, oftentimes we're playing a crescendo, which is getting from softer to louder, to help bridge the music and get into a louder section. You can also do the opposite of that and play a decrescendo. Playing a fill with dynamics is incredibly effective because it really takes the listener with you to the new arrival point. So let me give you some examples of those same eighth note 2-beat fills, but with some dynamic variations. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Now I'll put those fills in the context of a groove using the crescendo in the fill to lead the listener to the downbeat. I'm not going to change the dynamic of the groove at all. I'll play at the same dynamic, but then just build the fill into that crash on the downbeat. I'll play 4 different examples, 4 bars each. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. This is an opportunity for you to learn by rote or by ear. We don't have to notate every single thing that's played. You can just watch that video of me playing that groove with those specific fills, and you can watch and hear them and learn them that way. But even better than that, you can be creative and you can make up your own fills. There are so many combinations that you can use, even with just 4 eighth notes. And even using only 3 pieces of the kit, right? Between all the combinations of using 1 note at a time from these 3 elements or combining notes at the same time, the possibilities are almost endless. So experiment with that, be creative with it, play as many fills as you can. I'm going to show you one other thing right now. This is a rudiment that is very effective, easy to play, and it's used in a lot of music. It's called a FLAM. When we notate a FLAM, it has a primary note, but before that is the grace note. And the notation for the grace note, as you can see, is like a tiny little eighth note with a dash through the flag. So if you're playing a right-handed FLAM, the right hand is up and the left hand is down. The left hand plays the grace note and the left hand lands first. So you want it to be pretty close to this right hand. You don't want it to be, and you don't want it to be too tight either where it's right on top of each other. You want to have a little bit of space so it has some unique character. Flams are played in a lot of different ways. They can be played with the right hand or the left hand, and in rudimental styles or in concert percussion styles, they're played a little bit differently generally than on the drum set. But the main goal here when you're using a flam and a fill is just to sort of fatten up the sound of the snare drum. So as opposed to something like this, if you add flams to those snare drum notes, much fatter, has much more character. Or, depending on the sound you want to get out of your flam, you can change the grace note to be louder or softer, and you can also change the placement of that grace note, which will make it sound different. So a general flam might sound something like this. If I widen the space between the grace note and the primary note, it sounds like this. If I play the grace note louder, it sounds like this. You hear that a lot in popular music, rock music. It's a great way to get a big, fat note out of the snare drum. Now let's incorporate some flams into our 2-beat fill. The simplest way to do that is to just play them as quarter notes. That sounds like this. 1, 2. You can also add eighth notes on the bass drum in between those flams. 1, 2. You can play variations like this. 1, 2. Or something like this. 1, 2. Oftentimes in music notation, you'll see slashes with the word fill above it, just like you see here. What that means is you're supposed to play a fill, but we're not going to tell you exactly what to play. So in this exercise, we're going to play a 4-bar groove 4 times in a row and a 2-beat fill at the end of that 4-bar phrase, just like we've done in the past. But instead of telling you exactly what to play, I'm going to leave space for you to play the fill. Okay? Here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. In closing, fills can be incredibly effective musical tools, but the most important thing is that when you play a fill, you remain in time. The time and the tempo cannot be disrupted by the playing of a fill. A fill is never more important than the time or the tempo, okay? So you really have to practice these a lot to get everything to stay in time and to feel good and to be appropriate for the music. Also, you don't have to have a ton of drums. You don't have to play a lot of notes. A fill doesn't have to be long. As a matter of fact, in real life, a lot of professional drummers make a living playing really basic fills and playing them extremely well, right? So using flams, using quarter notes, using eighth notes, using the snare drum, the bass drum, you can play great fills. There are many awesome fills on some of the most iconic records that are very simple, very clear, and perfectly in time. For your assignment, I want you to go back and work on all those 2-beat fills using dynamics, using flams, using the snare drum and the bass drum, all kinds of combinations to try to get the music to feel good in time and set up that downbeat. Work on transitioning by playing crescendos into the crash, and then, most importantly, put that in some musical contexts. Play along with music, a bunch of different music, different styles, different tempos, and pay attention to the phrases. Try to match the phrasing that's happening in the music. In other words, don't play a fill every 4 bars. Play a fill where the music feels like it needs a transition to move to the next section. In the next video, we'll be introducing the ride cymbal.